Hey Scott, thanks a lot for joining this quick call. I just wanted, you did an incredible presentation on pre-built integration content that I wanted to capture really quick. So I truly appreciate your time, but really, I myself talk about how cool it is that SAP builds integration content to help our customers get going quickly. But I just wanted to get your perspectives on it and why it's such a powerful piece of our story when it comes to the BTP cloud.
Oh, thanks. No problem, Bob. My pleasure. It's always excellent to talk about integration, especially as it relates to the SAP Integration Services platform. So, do you think I should just run through some of the typical 3 or 4 slides that I have that kind of illustrates that point?
Yeah, that absolutely would be perfect.
All right. So, I mean, this is a standard introduction into quote unquote integration content, and I think you're 100% right that not a lot of people understand when we say to them, "Hey, Mr. Customer, we have integration content for you," and they typically think, "Oh, that's great," and they don't really give it much more thought than that because I think for starters, integration is such a core part of every customer's landscape that they just assume they're going to have to do work there. Number one. And so we flash up this slide and we tell people, look, we've got 1,400 ready built integration content pieces ready. We've got some APIs, we've got connectors, we've got e-governance content for 18 countries. But what does that really mean, especially when we put 5 times acceleration, 10 times the savings? So let's just take a look at a couple of little tidbits and see if this resonates. So we've got a study that was done by SAP, and we looked at the difference between somebody implementing a scenario, either SAP to third party or SAP to SAP, and we kind of compare and contrast that using out of the box content or not. And clearly you can see, just from the graphic alone, right, the custom built content, we've got thousands of dollars, $163,000 for an SAP to third party, or $132,000 for SAP to SAP, compared to $17,000 or $12,000 for the SAP to SAP. Now, of course, if you're a skeptic like myself, you think to yourself, wow, that's a that's a really big difference. How can that possibly be? Like
Yeah,
it's just such a big difference.
and Scott, a lot of the customers that I talk to, they have tools like MuleSoft, for example. So I think they would push back and say, wait a second, I don't think the custom built reflects my scenario, but I think it's closer than people realize, but they would push back because they.
Yeah, 100%. 100% they would push back because, and the example I always give is that as soon as if it's your first time, so someone comes to you and they say, listen, we need to do an integration scenario, we need to take customer data and move it into SAP, you're likely not going to find a table inside of SAP called customer. It just doesn't work that way. And even if you did, customer is related to 10 other tables. So then the starting point is there. Where are the data structures? How many of them are there? And are there services available to let you update those? So this is the starting point. So then you have to imagine a scenario where someone's already done that thinking for you and they've done most of the implementation for you. And so this is where it gets interesting because if you were to use a competitor tool like MuleSoft or pick the flavor of the day, BizTalk, pick any integration tool and you give it to someone, that's step one. And then the other part of it is everybody will say to you, oh, a connector to SAP, we have that. Well, sure, because a connector to SAP is the commodity piece. It's like saying a car has a tire. Well, yeah, we all have tires on our car, but what does that really give me, right? So anyway, so the connector is the starting point. And so this is the analogy that I sometimes use to describe that, right? You walk into a room and you're here to do a presentation. In your, when we used to travel the world doing presentations, and you reach inside your computer bag and you pull out a VGA cable. And the customer pulls out their projector and it only has one slot, a HDMI input port. And now you're like, oh, wow, because I brought my projector connector, but unfortunately, it's not the connector that you thought you needed. So now someone needs to build an adapter. And there's something in that word, adapt. You need to adapt one format to another. So on the bottom, you have this, HDMI to VGA adapter device. Well, what does that mean? How does that relate to a scenario that you're going to do with integration, because somebody had to build that adapter, VGA to HDMI. So now someone's going to have to build the adapter that goes from SuccessFactors to S4, and so on and so forth. So if we just take a look at that.
So I guess your point is the word connector and the word adapter are not the same thing.
They're not the same thing, because typically, like when people say to us, hey, Scott, like how many connectors do you have inside of integration services, or how many adapters? Sometimes they mix and match the words, number one. And it's very easy to provide people a list of technical connectors. Do you support flat file? Yes. Do you support RFC? Yes. Do you? And the list goes on and on. But that's the starting point. It's the place where you get a physical connection. It's like me dialing you or calling you on my cell phone. I say, hey, I dial a number, and you answer. That's the connection. And then you and I are going to have our conversation. If I said, hey, bonjour, Bob, comment ça va? Then if I'm speaking French and you only understand English, who's going to do that translation? So this connection is the starting point. It's not the end point.
What if I only understand Lithuanian? Now we're really stretching. So
100%. So I went to illustrate the point. I went to the MuleSoft site, and I go to the MuleSoft site and I look up how to connect with and how to deal with SAP, because of course they claim very strongly we can connect to SAP better than SAP can connect. Well, that's great. Again, they've got the connection to SAP, but when you look at what they provide as an example, what they're talking about is this little line. That's what they provide. They provide the line and nothing more than the line. And so then they talk about how you can write script and use their great GUI tools to create the transformation of the message. So imagine you have a customer record in SuccessFactors. Well, actually, let's make it Salesforce. You've got a customer record inside Salesforce. You've got a customer record inside SAP. And of course, they're not the same. They're built in probably different countries, different development teams. One guy speaking English, one guy speaking French. And you have to map those. Well, who do you think is going to do that? It's going to be the developer that sits down with that transform box, and they're going to have to figure out how those fields map. So this is interesting because why? Because in your head, every time you see one of these transform messages, you need to put a $sign there, because that's someone's time and someone's money. So you need the resource from Salesforce, you need the resource from S4 or SAP, you need someone to do the mapping in the middle, and you need someone to, of course, design, implement, and test. So then let's flip it over. Let's flip it over and look at the easiest scenario that I could find from SAP that has a very similar design, where there's a mapping, there's a request reply, there's a content modifier. Remember that $sign box that I alluded to? And there's some other mappings here. And there's 3 systems that are involved. But again, this is the easiest one that I could find from SAP. And you could find the same thing if you went to api.sap.com. The difference is, in this scenario, so starting point is, of course, I could build this scenario if I wanted to. The tooling that I've got access to, the dotted lines that represent the connections in the adapters to these third-party systems, it's all there inside integration services. The difference is every single one of these boxes are also provided by SAP. So the content that sits inside this rectangular box, it's all running in the cloud. Customers don't have to necessarily change it unless they've done heavy mods on their end. But normally, if a customer is using SuccessFactors, wouldn't be too heavily modified. They would pick this up, they would activate that content. The only thing they would have to do is configure the dotted line, right? Because if you have a SuccessFactors environment running in the cloud, well, of course, it's unique to you with a unique URL. So you'd provide that, and then that's it. You activate the content and you go. And this is really important, because if you think that each one of the boxes is a dotted line, and now I need to convert my VGA to HDMI, this is not a trivial thing. I mean, look at each one of those lines. So now you're starting to think, okay, so maybe the $160,000 is not that much of a stretch. If you've got 2 resources working on this, maybe 3, designing, implementing, testing, you got dev, you got QA, you got prod, and we're saying, hey, here's the content, just deploy it. So imagine if you were building it. And then imagine if this is your scenario. So remember, all of those boxes and then I'm going to zoom in on a small portion of it. Every one of those boxes where it says content modifier, there's work being done. There's work that's been done by SAP. We're pushing it out there for you to use, and it's something you don't have to do. So this is essentially, Bob, at the core of it, each one of those boxes is short. It's a technical artifact inside integration services. If a customer was building it from scratch, they can use all the technical tools at your disposal. It's kind of like, you walk into Home Depot and you see, a window that's already in a frame and it's already got wood around it. So it's already been boxed and done. So from a customer perspective, you take it, you bring it home, you put it in, and you're done. As opposed to, let's kind of build a window, put a frame around it. Like, it's very, very different. It's out of the box content that's ready to go. It's been tested by SAP. It's regression tested across releases. So there's just so many things, so many places where the customer saves time and money. It's just not comparable.
And so when we talk about ongoing maintenance of these integrations, right? You're really going to have SAP is going to update things over time. So as things change, your stuff continues to work, right?
Yeah, 100%. So that's important, because a couple of things that, what we've realized over the past few years is that not all customers were 100% ready for the pace of innovation that SAP adopted with a service like integration services. So if we're saying to you, let's just make it really simple. If we say once a quarter, we're going to upgrade the technical environment upon which this content runs, well, then the onus is on us to make sure that once that technical upgrade is finished, your content continues to run. So we do the upgrade, we give you more innovation, we give you maybe a new connector for a new backend that you didn't have before. We put that in place, but yeah, your content runs, and you're 100% right. Not only do we maintain that content, but we're publishing new content almost daily. So when you go to, again, api.sap.com, and you look at that main page, you'll see timestamps, modified yesterday, modified today. So there's just constant investment being made there.
So go back one slide real quick. Yeah, so this looks very complicated, but this is really just one integration, correct?
That's just one. It's just one integrated scenario. So I think this one here was the learning management system integration with SAP FI and CO. So that's just one. But again, if you go to the website, you're going to see hundreds of these scenarios just like this.
Yeah, so if you're a large company, how many integrations are you maintaining if you've got pretty significant SAP content? I mean, quite a few.
Hundreds.
And so when we start multiplying those original dollar amounts that you started with times hundreds, it turns into quite a few
100%. So even if when you look here and you go, so this is api.sap.com, and you look down on the left-hand side, there's a couple of different ways you can basically drill into this content. My favorite way is you go to content types and you click on integration. And when you click on integration, it centers the screen and where you need to be, and you click on view more. Now, my running joke is I would just start here and I just keep scrolling down for dramatic purposes, and you'll see the screen just keeps populating. And so that's just the high level packaging of the content. And then as you look at the number here, there's 34 integration pieces of integration content here, there's 13 here. And then if you scroll down further, you can get into just the success factors ones, and you can pull those up and drill in there. So there's thousands actually, but each one of the boxes containing more artifacts, more content. And that's even before we talk about the other types of integration content, like workflow, like APIs, like event-driven. Like, the story goes on and on, Bob. It's a really, really big topic. But
no, I get it.
The moral of the story is, the summary is, the more out-of-the-box content you can use, the more you will save. Period. Full stop. Undeniable.
And in the case of using this content, you're basically snapping it in and doing some configuration. You're not writing fresh code that you have to maintain yourself.
Exactly right.
Awesome. Hey, Scott, I truly appreciate your time. This was very enlightening. I think it's going to be a great share for everybody.
A pleasure, Mr. Soklas. Anytime.